Welcome to Liesl's Artistic Studio. Are you ready to paint beautiful flowers with minimal effort? Then join me today in this super easy watercolor flower tutorial. So go ahead and get your watercolor supplies ready and be prepared to paint the easiest watercolor flowers with guaranteed results. Along with my watercolor paper and paints, I also have water, a paper towel, and of course some brushes. Now, the brush is the key for today's painting. We need a nice, large, round brush that has the ability to hold a lot of paint. It's also helpful if it has a nice pointy tip as well. This is a number 6 Grabby brand brush, and to put this into perspective, you'll notice that it's about as thick as one of my fingers. And as an optional brush, let's pull out a small number 1 liner brush for the stems of these flowers. Now, I actually have used my larger brush for the stems before because it does have such a nice tip. But a smaller thin brush is usually a little bit easier to use, especially if you're more of a beginner to painting. Now to start off, I'm going to just draw a few marks or lines for my stems so that I know the general area where I want my flowers to be placed. This is an optional step. You can just dive right into painting if you'd rather. I just kind of like to do this so that I can sort of begin to create a nice composition on my page, like how many flowers I should have, how tall or short they should be, how close together they are, etc. Then if you like, you can also tape your paper down with some artist tape to help prevent some of the warping that the water and paint can sometimes create. And as a side note, any of the supplies you see me using today will be listed along with the links in the description of this video if you're interested. All right, let's get into painting. So first, let's wet down our large brush and mix together a nice color for our flowers. Now, I don't use orange a lot in paintings because it's not one of my favorite colors. So I thought today I'd paint these flowers a nice light peach color using cadmium orange mixed with a little alizarin crimson and maybe even a touch of azo yellow. I'm also using extra water here because I really want these to be light and delicate. But you're the artist for your work and you can choose any color you'd like. And of course, when mixing colors, it's always a good idea to test out your color on a scrap piece of paper before you begin painting. So first, let's paint an open flower here at about the top center of the page. We'll start this by first painting the yellow center of the flower using azo yellow. Now I'm just dabbing the tip of the brush to make several dots of color in a little bundle. Then I'll rinse and dry my brush off and take some of that peachy orange paint mixture to paint the petals with. I'll start with the tip of the brush slightly touching the edge of the yellow center. Then I'll pull the brush out and at the same time press down on the brush and then let up at the end of the stroke. I'll do this 2 to 3 times to create one nice petal. Then I'll paint 2 more petals on either side of this first one to finish off the top of the flower. Then, to paint the 2 bottom petals, I'll paint them in a similar way, but this time instead of pulling out and down straight, I'll pull them more off to the side using the side of the brush and then curving it up more towards the top. And as a side note, I'm leaving the ends of each petal a little more loose and rough to make it appear a little more natural and organic. Now let's paint a few unopened buds on our page. These are pretty simple. We're basically painting it the same way as we just did with the open petals. The only difference is that we'll just paint 1 petal per bud. While those buds start to dry slightly, let's mix our green to paint the stems and the greenery around the buds. I'm using some Hooker's green, and then I'll darken it up just a little bit more with a touch of ivory black. Now I'll paint some greenery around each side of each bud using a similar stroke as the petals. But this time, because I don't want it to be too thick, I'm not going to push down as hard. I'm wanting more of a thin stroke of color. It's important to note also that my buds are still just slightly damp, so this is allowing the green to blend and bleed a little bit with the peach color. But if you'd rather the colors not blend, just wait to paint the green after the buds are fully dry. You know, with my art channel, I try to provide a constant source of inspiration to you with tips and demonstrations that will help you improve in your artistic skills. So please consider subscribing if this sounds like something that will be helpful to you. Okay, we've got an open flower and some buds, so now let's move on to the third type of flower, which will be the flowers showing the side profile. I'll say these ones are my particular favorites to paint. So for these flowers, we'll again be using the same petal stroke as before, but this time we'll paint 3 petals all close together. I'm going to paint 4 of this type of flower, but again, as I said before, you're the artist here and you can paint as many or as few as you'd like. In fact, I think these flowers would make a beautiful and very easy greeting card. Use a smaller piece of paper and just paint 3 or 4 of these flowers on it and you're done. Now I'll rinse and dry my brush off and take a little bit of this green to paint some base greenery for these side-facing flowers. Now these flowers are still slightly wet, so the green is going to spread a little bit. I kind of like how it looks for these particular flowers. It just softens everything a little. But if you don't want it to blend, just wait for the flowers to dry before adding the green to the base. All right, before moving on to the final part of this painting, let's add in a little bit more color in the center of this open flower. I'm just going to take a little gamboge here and dab some dots of color around the edge of the center area. Then I'll take a little bit of green and add in some dots of green right in the very middle of the yellow. Okay, let's move on to the last part of this painting, the stems of the flowers. Now, if you have a nice pointy tip on your larger brush, you can just use that to paint the stems with, or if you need to, you can switch over to a smaller, thinner brush to do this with. So here I've got my number 1 liner. I'm just going to load that with color and paint along my pencil lines to create the stems for the flowers. The biggest tip I have for you here is to make sure you follow through with the stem lines that might be more in the background. You may have to go around petals or flowers that might be in front of the stems. And here is your super easy but beautiful set of flowers, perfect for when you want something simple and relaxing to paint. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.